Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at RSA 2023. Terry Sweeney here with Dark Reading, and joining me now is Marc Patterson, Chief Operating Officer with ZeroTier. Marc, thanks for joining us at the news desk.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
We are talking about modern virtual networking, but let's first start with Zero Trust, since that's another not necessarily technology, but I guess maybe strategy or set of policies that are guiding a lot of security strategies these days. For context, let's just start with the role that networking plays in supporting a zero trust environment.
Yeah, networking it's an important consideration. You hear a lot of companies that talk about zero trust in the context of identity, and networking plays an important role in zero trust in establishing essentially the framework or the fabric on which a lot of zero trust is being built. What you find with zero trust is it's very much about creating that security perimeter as close to within a network as you possibly can. And so you need to be able to enable that kind of environment, and that's kind of where networking fits into bringing that connectivity together.
Okay, that's helpful. Some viewers may confuse the concept of virtual networking with virtual private networks or VPNs. Help us understand the key differences.
Yeah, I think that there are really three attributes to virtual networking that distinguish it from VPNs. Virtual networks are inherently dynamic in terms of where the resources are. They're decentralized, and they're device-driven, which is a little bit different from kind of the concept you hear about where identity fits into things today. In typical VPN environments, you're creating a very static, a very controlled environment, and oftentimes you're utilizing areas like gateways or using ways to be able to route your traffic through a cloud or a central point. That sometimes creates a choke point and certainly becomes a challenge in modern networking when you've got people that are trying to do things like hybrid cloud, where they're trying to put resources or trying to put containers in various places. And what that calls for in a VPN, when you try to extend a VPN into that, is that you find yourself having to put those gateways and those resources and creating a very complex environment to do what is really very fundamental connectivity.
Okay, let's dig in a bit more. Help us understand some of the common use cases that virtual networking excels at addressing.
I think that what we find is in a virtual network context, especially with what we do with ZeroTier, we're operating in essentially, we are creating at layer 2 a cryptographic relationship between devices. And that's distinguished from how you think of routing with TCP/IP between devices. When you're looking in that kind of environment, what you've got now is the ability to support hybrid environments or hybrid cloud environments. You're able to support a variety of devices beyond just the person-to-person or computer-to-computer. Now you can start introducing things like IoT. You can bring in all sorts of types of devices that are out there because that landscape opens up dramatically. And then you add to this environments or applications that rely on a meshed relationship, such as multicast, or the ability for having multiple devices to be able to interact or have multiple devices involved in the control plane for all these devices. Those are all applications that are natural for virtual networking now. And I think the last thing, one of the things that we're talking quite a bit about here at RSA has been this whole area about portability with virtual machines. I think that one of the things that we find that enterprises in particular are very concerned with right now is the ability to be able to move Kubernetes clusters, being able to move devices around. And oftentimes this is across different cloud environments. So I want to be able to move from one to another, or I want to be able to interconnect them. And what we do, because we're creating this meshed fabric over top of this, it actually enables companies to very dynamically manage those environments. And because we're using cryptographic addressing, what that allows for a company to do that wants to be able to port over clusters from one cloud to another, they can do it very dynamically and have the network auto-recover quickly, because we're not requiring them, they're not required to change addressing because they're now moving from Amazon to Google Cloud or anything like that. And I think that that's where we find oftentimes that's a strength of what ZeroTier brings.
Okay, I mean, it's clear then that this is really well suited to some of the more advanced cloud applications, but help us understand a bit better why a company would implement something like virtualized networking into their own ecosystem?
There's a couple of considerations. I think first of all, what we find is it starts back with legacy environments where they've got either they're dealing with a migration of IP addressing from IPv4 to IPv6. They're dealing with multiple protocols. For example, in IoT, there's a host of different protocols you could be running. You're not restricted just to use IP. Where they want to be able to bring all of those devices into that single plane, that single virtual switch, if you will. What they're able to do with something like ZeroTier is they're able to actually bring those devices in and have the addressing be independent of your traditional kind of routing ecosystem that you would have. I think some of the other things that we see out there, even traditional VPNs and SD-WANs are a natural fit for these kinds of virtualized networks. And it's mostly because enterprises are looking now at this, again, going back to this dynamic nature of how you have to be looking at networking. If you look 10 years ago, hybrid cloud was not something that was in the forefront of thinking. Cloud was sort of like, if I'm going to move into the cloud, I'm going to go through a single instance or a single provider. Now, especially when companies are consolidating, they're bringing in more geographies into this. What they're having to look at is how do I best manage my resources from a cost perspective, as well as from a security perspective. And that's where having the ability to have that kind of that dynamic environment where you're not having to rely on specific static addressing like you would in a VPN environment, that's where it really is helped by this.
So just from my own understanding, the cryptographic approach that you're advocating supersedes the IP tunneling, that whole business.
I think that quite honestly, IP tunneling has been around for how many decades now?
At least 3.
And and I think that what we found is there's a better way. Peer-to-peer is what we put all this computing power into devices. We're putting smart sensors out there in IoT. These devices were meant to be able to communicate. And what you've taken these sort of legacy approaches towards running through central gateways, I mean, it literally is defeating the value that you've provided in those devices. And at the end of the day, I think that one of the things that we find, and I was speaking with a very large enterprise yesterday about this, they said, we were talking about the distinctions between network security and data security. And enterprises, I think, run this very kind of dangerous path. If they say, I'm in control of my network, and therefore I'm in control of my data. In a cloud context, you have to ask yourself as an enterprise, am I really in control of my data? And when you add to this things like hairpinning through TCP relay or using some sort of gateway approach, you're even exacerbating that, because now you're not really in control of the network either, because you're reliant upon a resource that's in the cloud.
What advice do you have for customers as you talk about this concept in terms of just understanding their own readiness, or what questions they should be asking themselves about whether the technology is right for their applications and their enterprise?
I think that a lot of the questions that enterprises are asking now are very fundamental. Performance, applications. What are the devices that I want to connect? How do you want to secure those devices? It still begins with understanding how you're securing the device. Networks are not meant to be restrictive. As much as we talk about all these elaborate kinds of rules bases and so forth, they're not meant to be restrictive. And I think that as long as you start with understanding how you're going to secure the devices, how you're going to secure, and then by extension, how you're securing identity, that's where you have to start in a network decision. And then I think from there, what it becomes a question of is how dynamic you need the environment to be. And I think that that's an important distinction in hybrid cloud environments in particular right now, because companies are having to really look at where do I best place my data from a cost perspective, and also from a security perspective, where do I want to have that? And I think that the last context that I would talk about is from an international perspective. When companies are considering where they're going to be placing their resources, what does that geographic footprint look like? I mean, I know that for us, we're operating in over 190 countries right now, and so as we speak, there's connectivity coming from anything from offshore oil rigs to sensors that are in the African desert. I mean, it's like you've got all sorts of dynamic approaches that can be taken. And I think what we're finding is that enterprises are getting really smart about what is the nature of a smart device and who wants to talk to who and what wants to talk to what.
Take us out with just some predictions about where you see virtualized networking evolving over the next 18 months.
I think one of the things that's encouraging, if I kind of look at where things are going, I see that now I see the dynamics between the different types of data pools that are out there are coming together. I think that we see a lot of commonality. I think that what's happening with identity and how the relationship between identity and devices is evolving. I think that we are going to find that visualization is going to be incredibly important. One of the other things I think is very important right now, and it's kind of an extension of that visualization, is compliance. And I think the nature of compliance is evolving from a set of common standards that people look at when they're looking at SOC 2, PCI, and so forth. I think that we're seeing an evolution of that's going to be a direct result of how these networks are able to communicate with each other. And so you're no longer going to be looking at how am I securing my data centers or the rules in which I'm governing my data centers. The threat plane has got to move closer and closer to the device. And so I think that we're going to see the dynamics of how you are able to understand what those devices are doing, where they're located, who they're communicating with, the rules that are governing that. Those are all going to become part of what's happening from a compliance perspective. And I think that just in general, I mean, in the same way that I think companies are moving away from these connotations of running through gateways. And it's sad to see even some of the more modern companies that are doing modern networking are still falling into the same old trap of putting gateways and transit gateways and trying to create colorful language around it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still impairing performance. Companies want to be able to get data between resources as quickly as possible. And I think that we're going to see over the next 18 months a true embracing of peer-to-peer the way it was supposed to, instead of kind of this approach where, I'm going to run it through a central resource and I don't really know how far away that is, and is that going to impact what are truly delay sensitive applications or data that we need to have in real time.
Well, great insights into a new way to think about network security, especially for cloud applications and for the Internet of Things. Marc, thanks for joining us on the news desk today.
Thanks, Terry. I really appreciate it.
We've been talking with Marc Patterson of ZeroTier. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us for this segment. We'll see you next time.